So in the first session, I talked about what we would call the vertical development and the vertical part of Bildung. Now I'm going to talk more about the horizons, how all the stuff that we need to know. And one of the reasons we need to know things is because we need to be able to navigate the world in which we live. And we need to not only survive, we also need to thrive out there. And that is basically why we created the education and school systems in the first place. The schools that we know today was part of the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't enough that kids could work on their parents' farms and then work on somebody else's farm and then get their own farm and be illiterate throughout life. The reason why we have schools is because there were, well, some of them were industrialists, but really political rulers who realized that they needed a population that could read and write. Society would not be able to function without it. So part of education is that we need to understand the world that we're living in, and it, I mean, it has a survival aspect. If everybody had to learn the hard way that you don't put two sticks into an electrical socket in the wall, not all of us would have been here. I mean, we need to know stuff about the world in order to survive. We also need to know it because we have democracies, we have societies where we need to be involved as citizens. And one of the ways of describing this is a model that I call the Bildung rose. And the reason why I call it a rose, and I'm now going to share it on the screen here, I hope you can see it. There we go. There we go. So others can see it now, not just me. Excellent. So the idea here is that from the earliest hunter-gatherers until our society today, there's 7 domains in any society. We all produce something in our societies, otherwise we wouldn't have food and shelter and clothes. There is technology. I mean, we're using tools in order to create the stuff that we need in order to survive. There may not be science in the modern scientific sense, but there is knowledge in every society that allows people to survive in nature or in their environment and to get new knowledge about the world that they're living in. There are also ethics, and the way that I distinguish between moral and ethics is that moral values describe the morally right, the rights and wrongs in familiar situations, whereas ethics is the principles, the norms, the more structural values behind what we do and that serve us in unfamiliar situations. So when we're in a situation we've never been in before, we can't use our moral values because they usually just tell us what's right and wrong in the situations we do know, but the situations we don't know, we need ethics and a different kind of compass. Narrative, all societies are held together by narratives. It can be religion, it can be ideology, it can be history, telling us who we are as a people or as a nation or as a continent or even as a species. But if we are to collaborate and trust each other, we need to share narrative. And then there's aesthetics. It's a fundamental thing about being human that we pursue beauty. And even the simplest little groups on the African savannah or anywhere else, I mean, even in the midst of the worst poverty, we long for aesthetics, we long for beauty. So that's just part of who we are, and people have killed for beauty. And the first financial crash that the world has ever described was, I guess, the Dutch tulip craze. I mean, if it wasn't for beauty, why would anybody buy all those tulips and risk their savings? So beauty is really important to us. And then there's power. All societies have power, one way or the other. Old societies can be wise elders. In more modern, bigger societies, it can be the best manipulators and not necessarily the ones that serve us the best. So all these domains are in every society. people, when they look at the model here, usually say, so where is nature? Why isn't nature there? But nature is in all of these domains. We wouldn't be here without nature, and we are nature, so that's why it's not there. But these domains, the way that I created the model, are connected. And they aren't just connected randomly. And the idea here is that prehistoric societies, indigenous hunter-gatherer tribes, in those tiny societies, those 7 domains were all entangled up in one another. But what has happened over the course of history as societies grew in complexity and size, these domains have specialized. And if we just jump to the Renaissance, science tore itself away from religion and actually became science. And what happened during the Enlightenment was that the political power separated from the narrative and from religion, and sort of left religion in its own domain and without the connection to the rest of society that it has in the pre-modern society. So that is part of what defines modernity. And the reason why we're bringing in this model to this conference is that in order for us to thrive as human beings in any society, we need to understand production technology, science, the fundamental principles, the narratives that hold us together, the aesthetics that allow us to communicate and which create the symbolic world, and the political power structure, in order for us to not just survive, but also thrive in our societies. And this is very complex in the complex societies that we live in today. And the reason why we brought in the 3 keynote speakers in the first session was because we wanted to connect these different domains. And I'm going to see if I can actually go to the next slide here. Yes, I can. So if we don't have, I mean, if we have collaboration among these domains, particularly the ones that are usually fighting against each other, like the yellow technology and the narrative. I mean, the narrative is religion. It usually wants to keep tradition, and technology disrupts that. But if they can figure out how to communicate, if they can collaborate around a shared society, we can have meaningful and purposeful development. And when Jeroen was talking about the AI technology and what it does to our sense of being human, that is a narrative about who we are as humans. This is the gap that we need to bridge. Anders was talking about production, the green arrow here, and ethics. And if we can have production with ethics, with good ethical standards, then we can have sustainable prosperity, and who wouldn't want that? The aesthetics and the science are 2 ways of exploring how we understand the world. And they tend to, I mean, they have different work methods. Science tries to figure out, so what is the world like? And it takes everything apart in order to find the bits and pieces and explain why things work the way that they do. Aesthetics and also narrative, they take stuff from the world and put it together in order to create new meaning. And if we have aesthetics collaborating with science, and science willing to collaborate with aesthetics, and here we're not just talking about the arts, but also pop culture, then we can create deep understanding, we can create popular education, and we can create Bildung that reaches beyond the very intellectual environments. I could speak about this model for hours. I will not do that. I will just show one more slide, because there's a top and a bottom to this, which is that the technology and production, they are about what is physically possible here and now. And of course, production is very much about profit, and so is a lot of technology in our postmodern or modern day and age. The narrative and ethics, they're focused on what ought to be. And we don't talk a lot about that anymore. We just, you know, the economy gets to decide everything. And Anas was talking about the economists who know nothing about nature. I'm an economist myself, and yes, I can swear to that. I did not learn a lot about nature in business school, definitely nothing, I would say. And then we have the sort of middle layer here of aesthetics, political power, and science, and they are the ones exploring what might be possible. And in the good, balanced society where people have Bildung and where we have a population that has Bildung and can both have conversations about what ought to be, what might be possible, and what is physically possible here and now, and who are willing to also demand to have politicians and other decision makers who have the same rich approach to the world. That is when we can have a thriving democracy and a thriving society, and we can have Bildung institutions that make sure that everybody has access to this kind of education and expanding of their horizons and getting deep knowledge into all of these domains. And this is a huge demand to put on us as human beings, because our brains are still Stone Age brains. We come into this world as Stone Age babies. And by the age of 25, we kind of expect, or maybe even at 18, when people get the right to vote, we expect that young people can participate in the decision making in society. And without having made this, all these domains explicit, without having expressed all this, we more or less expect that all adults in our society have some way of producing something that can support themselves and pay for their rent and their food and shelter, that we are not unsafe around technology, that we understand basic science and are not buying fake news or conspiracy theories. And that's not always very successful for us, and that we expect people to have higher goals regarding ethics than just their own self-interest, and that we know the narrative that keep us together, and that we pursue the arts sometime and listen to pop music on the radio, and of course that we take responsibility for part of the political infrastructure in our democracy. So these are really, really high demands, and if we're going to be safe in the future among our own inventions and among ourselves and in the nature that we have not taken very good care of for a number of generations, there is a huge challenge for us as people in the Bildung sector and as citizens, to make sure that we create institutions for this, that we create programs for this, that we create content for this, and also very basically that we create conversations around this. So on that note, I will pass the word back to Nadia.